The first sentence anyone hears is not profound. It's a complaint. A dog eating breakfast, ears still flat from sleep, looks up and says, "Why do you put me in the kitchen when you leave?" Not a bark shaped like a question. An actual question, slightly annoyed, in the exact language his owner uses every morning. By the time she finds her phone to film it, he's already moved on to the second complaint. The bowl is in the wrong spot. Here is the rule that changed overnight. Every animal can now speak and understand whatever human language is being used around it. Not telepathy. Not subtitles floating over a confused cat. Real words, formed in real time by a brain that didn't get smarter. It just got a voice that finally matches what was already in there. A golden retriever expresses devotion fluently. A goldfish, asked how its day was, says, "I don't remember," and that's not a glitch. That's the system working exactly as built. Intelligence stayed the same. Vocabulary didn't. The second break isn't philosophical either. It's logistical. A guide dog at a crosswalk stops mid-route and says, "I don't like this driver. Wait." A police K9 sniffs a suitcase and, instead of alerting, asks the handler, "Why does this matter to you?" and not the one 3 people back. Working animals weren't just trained. They were trained on the assumption that they couldn't ask why. Obedience had a hidden ingredient the whole time: silence. Remove the silence, and every leash, badge, and command becomes a negotiation instead of an order. From there, it moves into rooms with worse lighting. Courtrooms, mostly. Farms file the first lawsuits, not because livestock can suddenly argue their own case, but because juries, inspectors, and reporters can no longer pretend not to understand what's being said on the property. Nobody outlaws agriculture in a week. What happens instead is slower and stranger. New labeling laws, new welfare codes, entire supply chains quietly rewritten by lawyers who've never once mentioned an animal by name in the paperwork. The industry doesn't collapse, it gets careful, in the way industries get careful right before they change permanently. Zoos have a smaller version of the same problem, and a more awkward one. The enclosure plaque says natural habitat. The animal standing 6 feet away says something else. Some zoos close exhibits, some redesign them. A few simply stop putting signs up, because the residents kept correcting them. Out in the world that isn't fenced, things get genuinely chaotic. Rats don't ask for sympathy, they ask for zoning, and they're better negotiators than most building owners expect. Pigeons start naming specific windowsills. Poachers, who relied on animals having no way to warn each other across long distances, discover that warning each other across long distances is now the easiest thing in the forest. Conservation work gets harder in some places, and absurdly easier in others, depending entirely on who's listening. Back home, the chaos is smaller and more personal. New jobs appear almost immediately. Animal mediators, behavioral lawyers, the occasional therapist whose actual specialty is couples whose dog just mentioned something from last Tuesday. A pet that used to be unconditional is now a witness with opinions. Group chats fill up with the same joke phrased 100 different ways. My cat has been talking for 6 hours, and most of it is about other cats. It's worth correcting the easy version of this story early, because the easy version is wrong. People assume universal animal speech means universal understanding, the warm Sunday morning fantasy where every creature finally gets heard and treated fairly. That's not what a voice guarantees. It never has, for animals or for anyone else. Cows can say exactly what they need and still be ignored by someone with a quota to hit. Having the words was never the hard part. Being listened to was. The overlooked cost shows up at home, not in the news. The old relationship with a pet ran partly on projection. The dog loves you unconditionally because the dog can't say otherwise. Now he can, and what comes out is closer to a roommate's honesty than a movie's loyalty. Warmer in some ways, colder in others. People get the truth and lose the myth in the same sentence, and most of them, eventually, decide that's a fair trade. Language leaks sideways too, the way it always does. Within a year, slang from parrots and crows starts showing up in human group chats, the same way teenagers borrow phrases from wherever sounds new. Nobody planned that. Nobody plans the second-order stuff. It just arrives, gets repeated, and becomes normal before anyone notices it used to be strange. The dog is still in the kitchen tomorrow morning. Same gate, same bowl. Only now, when she leaves for work, he doesn't whine at the door. He just says, "See you at 6, the way roommates do, and goes back to whatever he was doing before she came downstairs. The animals didn't get smarter overnight. The species just finally found out what they'd been listening to the whole time, and discovered, a little uncomfortably, that they'd been doing most of the talking.